Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Dr. Mike Bowman of Murray State University. I'm on in the computer science department, and I teach telecommunication systems management courses, senior level and graduate level networking courses, and several of our security courses. At Murray State, our security emphasis, our security courses are all in our TSM program, although several of them are taught by computer science faculty, and they are pretty typical computer science security courses for information networking and personal information. We've got a great distinguished panel here with decades of experience in security and threat analysis, threat research, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing all of our speakers. We'll go in the order as listed in the program this morning. Let me just preface this by saying that if you think about it even a little bit, you recognize that we live in a time of great opportunity and great risk. The internet as we know it was basically invented, created just a couple decades ago. It goes way back to the 70s, of course, as research developed technology for networking, but the internet as we know it today was really brought online in about 1995. Today, in any town in America, to include Little Murray, Kentucky, in the westernmost corner of the state, you can walk down the street, have your cell phone buzz in your pocket, you can pull your cell phone out, your cell phone will tell you, gee, Mike, I know you like to eat Mexican food. You're only a block from a Mexican restaurant. I recognize that it's 11 o'clock in the morning and you don't teach until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So don't you think you ought to go down the street and have a Mexican lunch? And oh, by the way, here's a coupon for that restaurant that's just a block down the street. And when you get there, don't worry about pulling money out of your pocket because you can just pay with your cell phone as you go past the cash register. What a great opportunity that is to have technology support our life. At the same time, think about the risk of that credit card information, personal information, your location as you're walking down the street, being beamed out of your cell phone possibly. Great risk there for attacks on our personal information and identity theft. Getting hold of those credit card numbers, making purchases in our name with our credit card number. And it goes way beyond just the simple use of a credit card to applying for additional credit cards, getting home loans and things like that in your name with you stuck for the some portion of the bill possibly later on. And it's not just a personal threat, it's not just a threat against our personal information. Already in the past decade, 2005, 2007, and 2008, nations have waged cyber wars in Estonia, Georgia, the country of Georgia, not the state of Georgia, and Kyrgyzstan. We've had nation-on-nation cyber attacks. Recently, just a few months ago, the United States let slip by accident or on purpose that we were responsible for the Stuxnet virus that and worm that impacted the Iranian nuclear program. That might be a matter of pride on one hand that we're able to accomplish that technical achievement. It may have been a veiled threat to the rest of the world that, hey, don't mess with us, we've got these capabilities. On the other hand, you might think that it puts a target on our back, that every hacker in the world, every hacktivist in the world is now going to be thinking, geez, I should get back at the United States for that attack. So great opportunity, but great risk. And we've got a great panel here that's going to talk about both the threats and the defensive mechanisms to help us deal with those things. So without any further ado, I'll introduce our first speaker. Now, let me say, we've had a discussion in the back of the room already. We'd like this to be a very interactive experience. Each of the speakers has 10 or 12 or 15 minutes of prepared comments to present to you today. But we're very interested, very anxious to take your questions and have a dialogue, have an exchange this morning. And I've got at least half a dozen students in the room, and I can task them to ask questions if we don't get other questions from the audience, but by all means, please participate, please share your experience, please take full advantage of these great speakers that we have. I will not attempt to read all of the bios here for our three speakers this morning. They've got a full page for these three speakers. We'll go in the order that they're listed in the program. And so let me begin with Mr. Brian Minnick, the Vice President of Advanced Security at Cincinnati Bell Technology Solutions. Brian?
Great. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that introduction. Okay, thank you. Everyone hear me all right? So thanks for that introduction. As Mike said, I'm the Vice President for Advanced Cybersecurity at Cincinnati Bell. At the end of the day, that's really kind of a new business model we're starting up at Cincinnati Bell. Before that, I was the Chief Information Security Officer at General Electric with responsibility for the energy, aviation, and transportation businesses. Typical GE fashion, they all together. So coming from General Electric, I had a lot of experience, as you look at aviation business, one of the large U.S. defense contractors from a military perspective, providing jet engines for the U.S. military. So a lot of people interested in that type of technology from the nation state perspective, things of that nature. On the energy side, they make nuclear reactors. They process and refine nuclear fuel, as well as we do in the energy sector. So we got some people who are interested from that perspective as well. So within that role, I had a lot of experience with what I'll call advanced targeted attacks. We call that advanced persistent threat, APT, whatever name you want to put on that. And going through some of the experiences there, and basically standing up several IT security organizations within the overall GE environment, really kind of learning firsthand what's happening out there from a targeted perspective, from a nation-state perspective, things of that nature. And then really maturing those programs, working with a lot of the defense industry to figure out what's the right way to address some of these.
There you go. All right. Now they can probably hear me online. As Mike gave us a stern lecture at the beginning about using the microphone. So really taking a look at really best practices and how do you handle cyber threats and the next generation of cyber threats. We built up several programs within the General Electric company and really started seeing differences and changes in what the attackers were doing. Towards the end, I actually started discovering attacks outside of my environment, having to make calls to companies and informing them that they were compromised. And it's interesting because it's very similar to watching someone go through the stages of mourning. You make that phone call and there's immediately denial. Oh, well, we just ran our antivirus. There's nothing out there. You're the one that has the problem. It's not us. Nothing to see here. Go about your business, please. And then we show them some forensic information. Hey, here's this back door. Here's this thing. Look at this log. Check that out. And then it leads to anger. Oh my gosh, I can't believe this would happen to me. Who are these people? What? This is outrageous. And then finally they move to the acceptance phase. Okay, what do we do about this? And after so many times telling them, there really isn't, there's a couple companies that do incident response of this nature. They're generally booked 3 to 4 months out and they charge you an arm and a leg for their services. Good luck. I realized, wow, there's a lot of people that need help in this sector. And that's really what really drove me to leave General Electric and start with Cincinnati Bell, and really start providing some services around those type of attacks and helping people with that. And that's really as we were preparing and having some conversations about this this presentation, I was asked to give kind of some background on the services and the business that we're doing and what that might mean for some of you out there in the audience. So to do that, I want to start at the beginning of the story. At least from my perspective, as you look at the traditional IT security marketplace and what's been done in that industry, it really grew up in this age of, hey, there's a virus out there, and we need to protect our people from the viruses. And those viruses were things that just randomly went around and tried to hit whoever they could hit and try to spread around as much as they could automatically. And the approach that was adopted for handling that threat, if you think about the antivirus industry, was we're going to get a large install base. When one of our people gets hit, we're going to grab that and then we're going to inoculate the rest of our customers from it. So out of that install base, a couple people may be sacrificed, if you will, but we'll learn from that and then we'll inoculate the rest of our install base. And that was a fantastic model. It worked very well for a long time because what we all saw was pretty much the same thing. It was a computer program that did the same thing over and over again. And once you catch it once, you can figure out how to stop it because it does the same thing over and over again, right? So that's where this industry kind of grew up in, where you get that AV model, where you start getting compliance-based security. If you do X, Y, and Z, you are secure. You can feel good about yourself and you can move on with life. It's a little bit, I use the analogy, when I was growing up, I had a really crappy chess program on my Commodore that was called Chess Master 2000. And I figured out 5 or 6 moves that I could do to beat that chess program. I just happened onto it, you know. So anytime I wanted to feel like a rock star chess player, I would do the 5 or 6 moves and I would beat the computer. I mean, I'm brilliant. I'm the best chess player in the world. I'm beating the computer anytime I want to, right? The problem is, and it was against the computer. So every time I did the 5 or 6 moves, the computer did the same 5 or 6 moves and I ended up winning. If I were to do those 5 or 6 moves against Bobby Fischer, it wasn't going to work, right? I might beat Bobby once, but Bobby's going to figure it out the second time, for sure, right? And then he's going to make me look like the amateur that I am in the chess space. Same thing happening now in the security space. We move from dealing with programs, a program that's self-replicating itself, that's just trying to cover and do the same thing over and over again and get out there as much as possible, to something that is written entirely for you. Something that really at the end of the day has an intelligence behind it. There's a person or a team of people who are targeting you now, and they're writing things specifically for your environment. And that's where the game changes. And that's where I believe the security industry as a whole is kind of falling down now, and the models that they have in the past haven't quite kept up. To think that there is any product that anyone could ever make that will stop a person, a determined person, I think is either arrogance on the part of the product maker or ignorance of the threat that they're up against. To think that think about it, is there something that you can make that another person could not figure out a way around? I don't see it. And it is conceivable, you can just completely unplug from the internet, but then business stops. You need that, right? The other analogy I use here, think about your house. Is it possible for you to keep me out of your home? You can lock the doors. I'll break a window. Okay, you board up the windows. I'll cut a hole in your roof. Okay, now we steel plate the whole house, or I'll bury a tunnel underneath there and come in through your... Point is, and you could conceivably keep me out of your house, but you're not going to want to live in it, right? You could conceivably keep someone out of your business, out of your company, but could you do it and still transact business, right? That's the challenge and that's the risk. And that's, as a security industry, we need to get our hands around and our heads around what does that mean, and how do we help businesses make intelligent decisions about what to secure, what not to secure, so that they can keep doing business as optimally as possible. And that's where this concept of the kill chain comes into effect, using something we call intelligent analysis and adaptive defense. The idea behind this is basically that a successful cyber attack doesn't just happen, poof, someone walks out the door with data or steals something. There's a series of steps an attacker has to go through before they can put themselves in a position to execute a successful attack. Those steps are called the kill chain. What you want to do is be able to detect an attack at every one of those steps in the kill chain. And then anytime that you detect an attack, you have to feed that into an intelligent analysis cycle. You have to look at that attack, figure out who is it, what are they doing, how are they moving around? Because here's the thing, an attacker generally will send something to you, it won't work the first time. So they'll tweak it, and then they'll send it back. It won't work. They'll tweak, they'll send back, they'll tweak, they'll send back. They'll keep iterating through this cycle, trying to poke and prod your defenses, just changing their attack slightly each time. If you're able to catch that first attack, and you stopped it, that's great. But if you take and you look at that, you can gather all kinds of intelligence about who's attacking you, what they're doing, and you can actually stay one step ahead of them. You can actually watch them as they change their attack over time. The more they attack you, the smarter you become about who it is and what they're doing and how you can defend yourself. This helps you set priorities around what do I do, what do I go after. If I've got 20,000 vulnerabilities in my environment, which ones do I go after first? Knowing who's attacking you and what they're doing helps you prioritize not only those vulnerabilities, but even the areas that you want to focus on. Should I focus on VPN? Should I focus on email and phishing? Should I focus on my internet? Understanding these attacks that you're stopping. Any security program can tell you, oh, we stopped thousands of attacks last week. We're awesome. thousands of attacks. It's great. How many of those came from one organization or one group of people? And were they poking in areas, and are they about to get around your defenses? That's the real trick. And that's what intelligent analysis and adaptive defense helps you do. You use that intelligence from the attacks you detect to improve your defenses going forward. And that's really what we're talking about as we stand up this new business venture. As we do that, we're rolling out several products that cover that kill chain. You can see up here whether it's looking at email, whether it's looking at traffic on your internal network, traffic coming in and out of the internet, leaving your environment for the internet, coming into your environment from the internet, and then feeding that back to an area, basically a tool that's able to do signature-based detection, reputation-based, behavior-based, as well as big data analytic-based detection. Here's the thing, when we talk about adaptive defense, you'll see a lot of products out there today that say, we do behavior-based detection, we do big data analytics-based detection. That's great, those are all very good. But over time, the attacker is going to figure out a way around it. A couple years ago, behavior-based was the best thing since sliced bread. I'll open up a virtual machine, I'll open the file in there, and if it starts talking to the internet or it writes to the registry, I'll tell you about it because that's weird and you want to know about it. And it caught pretty much everything. It was amazing. But then the bad guys figured out that that's what's going on, so they made their malware require the user to click on something. Or they made their malware sleep for 20 minutes because no one can keep a virtual machine open for 20 minutes as they're scanning every email that comes in. That just takes a lot of compute capacity. Now all of a sudden behavior-based isn't quite as good as it used to be. So the whole idea around what we're building out is that these products are plug and play. So as the next whiz-bang detection capability comes online, we're not going to sell a new product. It's a new capability that you just plug into the existing products. Because we know that the attackers are going to change. We know that you're going to have to adapt that defense over time. So we're not hanging our hat on just one way of detecting this stuff, but multiple ways of doing that over time. That's really what we're depicting up here and on this slide, which I forgot was in the deck. As you take a look at that again, the whole idea is to provide an adaptive defense that allows you to detect an attack at any point within that kill chain. And this kind of shows you of those products that we're rolling out, how does that fit and how do you get coverage across the kill chain. So for example, if someone's doing reconnaissance on one of your external websites, and you're watching that traffic, you potentially say, hey, someone from a known bad IP, a place that they usually work from, is surfing your internet site, surfing your external website. You should be expecting a SQL injection attack or something of that nature to be coming and be able to see that. And then all the way through to the very end where someone's actually on your network moving data around or trying to take passwords or whatever it may be. Give you complete coverage there. So that, in a nutshell, is really what we're trying to roll out from a telecommunications industry perspective. You know, what does this mean, or how can this fit in? You know, just actually yesterday, General Alexander from the NSA was speaking in an event. He mentioned that the ISP should be the first layer, could be the first layer of defense for cyber attacks that are going on out there. You know, after standing up several programs, IT security programs, based on this methodology of intelligent analysis and adaptive defense, I really believe that providing capabilities like this within the cloud as traffic, as we deliver traffic to our customers, being able to find and search for these things and then perform that intelligent analysis as we detect attacks being delivered through us to our customers, is a real value add and something that a lot of people are interested in doing. So that's something that we're kind of focusing on and delivering this in a way that customers, both small, medium, large, can take advantage of as kind of a cloud-based service. So, all right.
Please now, questions for Brian? In the center there, can we pass the mic there, please?
My question is, who are these people? And I work for a private business, and I'm not very involved in our IT security. But who are these people who want to get into, like, for example, I work for a law firm. Who would want to get into? I view our files as largely incredibly boring.
Yep. So we're actually seeing a lot of law firms being targeted now. So if you think about whether there's an acquisition, a joint venture, whatever it may be, that a lot of the times the law firms are involved in those type of activities, and they have all the records around that. So anytime you're doing work like that, so a couple things as you look across industries. From a manufacturing perspective, a company that invests a couple $1 million, billions of dollars, whatever it may be, on research and development to develop that next widget. They are betting their future on that new product that comes out. If a competitor can get that information for the cost of a couple hackers, now they can go to market much more cheaply than the person who actually invested to generate that IP, right? So that becomes a competitive advantage. And oh, by the way, certain countries, I mean, think about it, all the capability that the NSA has that we all now know about, right? The FBI, the CIA, all that stuff. If your business had access to that, what could you do with it? What could you do with that from a competitive advantage perspective, right? Now, some countries, the state and the company are the same. They do have access to that capability. And, oh, by the way, they have a lot of people that they need to put to work, right? So they have no problems using that capability to help from an industrial, from a competitive advantage perspective in the marketplace. And then even anytime that you're doing a deal, again, like a joint venture or something like that, a lot of the law firms have all that information. So we do see them targeted quite a bit, and they're not looking for it because, to your point, they view this as incredibly boring legalese that, oh my gosh, who would want to go through that? But there are nuggets of information out there, right, that they have. Even then, as you move into the financial sector, so you talk about who it is, a lot of times it's nation state trying to generate jobs or build industries within their own countries. From a financial perspective, there is a decent amount of organizations out there that are just in it for the money. I just want to break into the bank, I want to steal information, whether it's personal information or even get access to the ATMs on the back end. And many times, illegal wire transfers. Think about it. If you were to leave your checkbook at Starbucks down the street, someone were to pick that up and write a check on your behalf and cash it, you would be liable for that, right? If someone picked up your password to your online banking system and went in and made an illegal transfer on your behalf, a lot of times people go back to the banks and say, I didn't make this transfer, you gotta give me that money back. It's the same analogy, but obviously if you're the customer, you're not thinking it's the same, and you're telling the bank, I want my money back. So over 60% of the cyber fraud cases in the financial industry are non-recoverable, and of those, about 38% of those, the bank actually has to pay back the customer because they want to keep the customer, depending on who it is. So they end up losing that money. So those are some of the things that are happening out there, why people care about it. Depending on which sector you're in, you have different reasons to be concerned, but that's some of the things that are happening.
Good question.
You mentioned cyber fraud and financial services. Is any part of what your solution is involved in protecting against point-of-sale fraud?
Yeah, so depending on many ways of cracking that point-of-sale nut, some of them through the wireless network that's local, things like that. We're focused mostly on things that are going to be internet-based, not requiring someone to be physically in the area. All right, so if there's a back door that gets installed on point of sale, we would be able to help with that. But if it's someone sitting in the parking lot trying to get into your wireless, we would not be able to help from that perspective. Most of the stuff that we're focused on, again, from an advanced attack perspective, happens across international borders, and the ability to prosecute is next to nothing. I can repeat it for you.
You mentioned nation states.
Yeah.
Can you be more specific?
Yeah, so the question was, I mentioned nation states, can I be more specific? Yeah, there's, again, depending on the area that you're in, obviously China is huge from an industrial perspective. Russia is high on that list as well. They tend to focus a lot more on the financial sector, was the Russian business network, which is basically the Russian mafia. Even places that you wouldn't think about, Brazil has a very strong cyber capability, Israel, France, Syria, the Syrian Electronic Army as well, that is out there as well. So it's starting to catch on and really grow and take on a life of its own. But I'd say the biggest players, obviously China, Russia, are the two at the top. And then depending on what sector you're in, a lot of other people start playing in specific spaces.
We're going to take one more question before we go to the next speaker. Mike in the middle there.
Follow instructions and wait for the microphone. So as a business, to what extent do I need to try and protect against nation state? Because I imagine if I have Israel going against me, they're probably going to find a way into my house no matter what I do, because I don't have enough money or time to keep them out. Versus, should I just be the faster than my friend when the bear is chasing me? Do I have to be the hardest apple on the tree to reach? So
Right.
if I'm spending enough money, then enough time and energy on than the other folks in my industry, am I safe enough?
So part of my experience is, and you actually used an analogy that I use repeatedly. In this case, it's not good enough. You do have to outrun the bear because the bear is coming after you. There may be specific things that you are interested, or that they are interested in that only you have. Whether it's across the industry, there are certain approaches that you're taking that your competitors are not, right? So that makes you a specific target for that. So yes, you do have to invest. And I would say the ability to protect your entire environment, depending on how big you are. Now again, I'm used to dealing with global networks that, I was responsible for 122,000 employees, right? My ability to say no one's ever going to get in here, not reality, but to say, hey, what are the top 1% to 2% of intellectual property or information that we want to protect, and be able to protect that? Yes, you can do that. It's like saying, could you stop someone from getting to Manhattan? Probably not, but could you stop someone from getting into the safe in the vault of a building in Manhattan? Yes, I have a better chance of doing that, right? So depending on the size of your organization, I would say you do need certain measures to protect the entirety of it, and that's kind of what we're talking about here with some of the things I showed you. But beyond that, focus on the more critical information that you have and put very strong walls around that. It's going to impact the productivity of your workers and your employees. Yes, it will, but you can protect that stuff. So I would say this, in a combination of tiering your protections around the critical IP, is a workable strategy.
All right, well, thank you very much for those questions. Keep the questions coming, but let me move on to our second speaker this morning. This is Mr. Mike Kromika, a HIPAA security officer at Baptist Health in Paducah, Kentucky. Mike?
And good morning, and thanks for this opportunity. Just to kind of tag on to an analogy that Dr. Bowman mentioned earlier about walking down the street and your phone beeps and you get the coupon and all that stuff. I recently lost in a storage building to a fire. I had finished mowing my grass with my riding lawnmower, put the mower up in the storage building like I've done 1,000 other times, and within 10 minutes the building was on fire. And while I was researching what would take to replace that, the next day in my Facebook feed, guess what page Facebook wanted me to like? It wanted me to like the Home Depot page where I had went looking for a riding lawnmower replacement. So that type of invasiveness, if you will, is propagated not only in our business life but also in our personal life as well. Won't take much time to read everything that's on the slide here. Just wanted to give you an idea, a little bit about who Baptist Health Paducah is and what we do. Our marketing folks put this slide together, and basically what it says is we have a bunch of hardworking, dedicated folks who really put out an effort to make sure that the care that we're providing to our patients is exemplary, and we have numerous awards and certifications to match to that. Some things that we have done here, and again, I'm not going to take the time to go through each of these because I really want to focus in on the security aspect, but just some of the things that we have going on today, some of the things that we're doing, and then more importantly, what are some of the things that we have that are in the wings. But a couple of things that I want to touch on while I have your attention. My role as the HIPAA security officer. For those who are not aware, HIPAA is an acronym for the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996. And it is a set of government legislation that has been updated a couple of times since that helps healthcare providers, service providers, payers deal with the privacy, the security, and the confidentiality of patient information that they submit to us. The original intent of the legislation was to provide a common platform, if you will, for insurance companies to trade information back and forth. But as anything that the government has had their fingers in, it has really blossomed and developed into so much more. So there are two of us at the hospital that are responsible for making sure that Baptist Health Paducah stays on the straight and narrow regarding the HIPAA legislation. Our privacy officer deals with the spoken word and the written word. anything that is printed, my responsibility to the organization is obviously to the electronic data. And it covers a wide variety of topics that are available. Some things in particular that I wanted to hit on, because our business is healthcare, all of our technology, our networks, our infrastructure works just like many other industries, and we're not immune to a lot of the things that Brian talked to you about. We experience the denial of service attacks, and we experience all of those kind of things that are out there and other folks have experienced as well. Maybe not to the degree that a very large or worldwide organization might see, but we have had our share of those. So, but I didn't want to necessarily focus on that as much as I did the internal stuff, the things that we have to do to make sure that we're protecting our data. I made a comment to some folks earlier that as we are rolling out technologies and as we are rolling out access for folks who do various jobs in the hospital, just like many other industries, we're required to divvy out our security in a role-based fashion. So somebody who's responsible for cleaning a patient room doesn't get the same level of access to data as someone who is providing care to that patient. Two completely different roles, two completely different expectations of access. And one of the things that we educate folks on is that if you're in a caregiver role, we give you access to the programs and the data responsible and necessary for you to do your job successfully. We may give you access to your own personal data. If you were a patient at Baptist Health Paducah and had a test or procedure done, we have that data because we're required by law to keep it for a certain period of time. But what you don't realize is because you have access to that data doesn't give you the right to look at it. And we have a responsibility that we track the entering, the editing, the deleting, the viewing, and the printing of data. Those 5 elements were required by law to be able to do that. And so anytime that a patient requests, whether they have a suspicion that their data might have been compromised or they were just interested to know who performed one of those 5 actions, we're happy to provide to them, either on paper or electronic, an audit trail of everybody who took liberties with that data. And it could be folks who registered them, it could be folks who actually provided their care, folks who performed various tests and functions to them. It could be their case manager who's responsible for making sure that everything is documented properly and that the data is appropriate to the care and especially the charges that patient will be responsible for paying. It could be somebody, an insurance company who has a reviewer on site that reviews it to make sure that the charges are appropriate or if there are questions about that patient's bill. All of that activity is logged and all of that we're required to be able to produce if requested. We're also required to periodically audit ourselves to make sure that we're doing that properly, and periodically we will pull an audit based on some variable, by employee, by patient, by time frame, by application, and we'll spot check that to make sure that that access is taken. As you can imagine, the amount of data that a person might accumulate during an inpatient stay in the hospital can be an enormous amount of data. We have hundreds of terabytes of data that we are responsible for keeping and maintaining and tracking. And it takes a pretty good deal of effort to make sure that even on a spot check basis that is done appropriately. But HIPAA doesn't deal specifically just with patient data. Some of the more recent actions from the HITECH Act, for instance, require us to be diligent with our physical security. So all of our employees have a proximity-enabled badge that allows them access to or denied access to specific doors or areas of the hospital, and we limit that again based on role and responsibility, but we track that as well. Folks from the outside, ambulance drivers, fire officials, police, anybody that enters the building, we're required to track that access and secure it. Most recently, we've been working with the Department of Energy because we have a radiation therapy, a cancer center program. We keep radioactive materials on site. And because the amount, the quantity of, and the strength of the radioactive materials we keep on site exceeds a certain threshold, the Department of Energy is requiring us to take additional safeguards with physical security, with locks, with motion detected cameras, all of those things that are appropriate and semi-reasonable to protect that radioactive source so that it doesn't fall into the hands of a terrorist or somebody who might use that radioactive material for something other than its intended use. Some other areas that we deal with, many of the devices that we would use in the care of a patient work like a computer. They have operating systems, they have hard drives, whether it be a CT scanner or an MRI in the radiology department. It could be an ultrasound machine, various other devices that are required to properly care for the patient. All of those things collect and store protected health information. So it's my responsibility to make sure that we protect that as well. And when we have servicemen that come in, service personnel, then I always bail, service personnel that come in to service the machines, we have a specific process that we're required them to use to access that data. When the machine is repaired or replaced, we can't let that hard drive go out the door. So we make sure that we obtain that hard drive so that we retain that data and make sure that data is safe and secure. The same principles apply to, we have some 1,400 or 1,600 workstations on our local network, along with some 250 or 300 mobile devices. And because those mobile devices not only have the ability to travel within the hospital proper, but also outside of the organization, whether that be for business travel or patient care at an offsite location, we encrypt those, and we have a mechanism not only to encrypt the drive to keep it secure, but also to track that device to make sure that if we get a report that has been misplaced or heaven forbid lost or stolen, we have the ability to not only locate that device, but also to remotely manage that device. Other areas that we have responsibility to from a security perspective, as the President's Accountable Care Act, the Affordable Care Act proceeds forward, I had somebody ask me recently how business was in the healthcare industry. And my response was, well, if you're in the business of delivering healthcare or providing healthcare, it's okay. It may be a little slow right now with the economy, but it's okay. But if you're in the business of healthcare technology, the President's programs are really kicking your butt on that. We're as busy as we've ever been. But as we continue to migrate toward that electronic record, we continue to amass all of these pieces of data, and we actually have 129 different applications that we support that store patient data. So making sure that we're diligent with that security of that data, both on the device and on the network, is very important. We do take precautions to make sure that the data is safe and secure. So we have policies in place that prohibit any kind of data to be written to the device's local hard drive. We're a big proponent of Citrix-based solutions and virtual machines that help us accommodate that. So that kind of in a nutshell is a little bit about the HIPAA process, the HIPAA program, my responsibilities to the hospital and to the patient, and I'd like to open it up for any questions, maybe. If there are no questions, then I get to tell the story.
I don't know if you would have a thought on this, but it sounds like you might. And that is, how far are we from having each person's medical records, no matter developed by who, this hospital, that doctor, that hospital, whatever, so that it can be centrally accessed by anyone that person might go to for health care?
And of course I do have an opinion on that. Part of the President's initiative includes the ability to exchange data. And Baptist Health Paducah was one of the first in Kentucky and one of the first in the nation back in 2007 to be able to provide to a physician office that we didn't own dynamic, electronic, discrete data for them to include in their EMR. And what that does is that gives the physician or the caregiver a more complete picture of the data that's out there. Now, obviously, at that time, they were only getting it from one provider, and the patient would have the opportunity to see a number of providers. But part of the President's initiative does include a step in that direction. To achieve meaningful use, which is another whole topic that we could talk about, the law requires the organization to be able to produce electronically a document called a CCD, continuation of care document. And it has on that very basic information that's been standardized: biographic, demographic, guarantor type information identifiable to the patient, as well as most recent lab tests and radiology reports and things like that. So that initiative is currently in place, and Kentucky was kind of late getting on the HIE bandwagon, the Health Information Exchange bandwagon. They had an initiative in place, and it took them a little while to get traction and understand exactly what they wanted. But there are now a few select providers in the state that are exchanging this CCD document. We don't provide that yet, but we do have the ability to obtain that from the Health Information Exchange from those folks that do. But to answer your question, I still think that we're probably still some years away from being able to do that. You may have noticed on one of my slides, I talked about us being in a paper-light electronic medical record environment. I think to get to the point to where we truly have an integrated record that's available to everybody, and all that information is available in that record, we truly have to get rid of the paper at some point in the process. And I think that we are still some years away from that. I think eventually we'll get there. Mike has 4 years and 2 months before he's able to retire, and I don't think I'll see it there. But I do believe that eventually, as the technology progresses, as the encouragement from either state, federal, or local providers encourages us to do that, it's absolutely the right thing to do for patient care. If I am somewhere traveling on vacation, most recently I was on a cruise week before last and visited some places off the coast of South America, and if I were to need medical attention during that time, there's no way that those folks would have had access to any of my medical records other than what I might keep in my head or might be available from a provider that they could contact. So it's absolutely the right thing to do for the continuity of proper patient care, but I think that we as an industry are still several years away from that.
Follow up there or next to?
Well, the reason I ask the question is I have aging parents and sometimes take them to various providers. And one of the most frustrating things is to get to the provider and documents or medical records are supposed to be provided by the previous provider, and they're not there, so you've got to go through the whole process. At any rate, personal story. But I guess my question is, what kind of security issues would that sort of centralization of our medical records pose, and why, if there is a security risk, what risk out there is there? I mean, in other words, why would someone care what my medical records say? Who might want to hack into it?
Sure. The way that the President has configured his processes is he's looking to each of the states to develop a statewide integrated network where health information from various sources, whether they be public sources or private sources or government sources, all of that data is standardized and available through a state-run health exchange. In the absence of that, the federal government has provided that if the state chooses not to participate, that we will have a process to be able to do that. But the goal is to integrate all of those statewide entities into a federal entity that would then be the storekeeper of that. And the way that traditionally works is, it's not that we send data to this very large warehouse and then all of it is amassed and just waiting for somebody to use it. Typically, there's a request made. So Dr. Smith knows that Dr. Jones is one of my other providers, so they'll make a request to the HIE of Dr. Smith and say, please send all of Mike's records, and all of Mike's records will be sent electronically that way. So to begin with, there's not going to be this one very large warehouse clearinghouse of all this data that everybody sends to that you pick from. It's just a request. Eventually, that data warehouse will grow very large as those requests continue to accumulate. But to answer your question, there will be things on your medical record like your social security number, your date of birth, some very basic protected health information. There are currently 13 elements that the government protects, and that expands all the time. But there'll be some very sensitive, personally identifiable information that we collect on all patients, and that's honestly not only to provide the care that's appropriate to you, but our third-party adjudicators that we use to submit bills to, they want that information as well to make sure that the claim we submit is appropriate and valid to their policyholder.
All right, time for one more, and then we're going to transition.
Just a quick question with regard to the data that you're protecting. Who owns it? I know that's probably a really hot topic for all forms of data, but specifically, with healthcare, is it my data? Is it your data? Does it belong to some other domain?
Sure, and that's an excellent question, and part of the reason why the state of Kentucky was struggling a little bit to get their HIE off the ground, because there were issues about who owns the data, and then once they figure it out, what can we do with that data? And if my data is there, I want to be sure that I have a say-so in what happens to that, and I don't want it sold to life insurance companies or durable medical equipment companies or somebody else who might do some marketing to that. But I think that the jury, to answer your question, I think the jury is still out on that. The perspective that we take is that whoever holds the data owns the data. And it's my responsibility for all the data that I hold to make sure that I protect that, whether it's your data or my data or his data or her data. But that's the position that we have taken with that, because it's not that I don't trust you to protect your data, but if I protect it, I know it's being done with it. And legally, I'm responsible with it as long as I hold it.
Before we move on to our next speaker, I just want to remind folks, not just in the audience, but on the live stream, that if you have a question and you're not here in the room with us, use the hashtag TSM Summit, and I'll make sure your question gets asked.
Now, I know we cut off one question. Please hold that. We'll get back to maybe some questions from Mike at the very end. Our last speaker this morning has come all the way from the West Coast. I especially thank her for the thousands of miles she's traveled yesterday and today. But Ms. Vanessa Pagueros is the Deputy Chief for Security at DocuSign, a very critical cyber infrastructure company. Vanessa.
I'm going to stand up here because I kind of feel like a movie's playing behind me and I can't see it. Yeah, I did travel quite a ways, and then driving 2 hours from Nashville to Kentucky, which I've never driven through Kentucky, and by the way, is very beautiful, coming from the Northwest. So it was actually a pleasant surprise. How many of you are familiar with DocuSign? Right, so that is great. So for those of you who aren't, we're the leading electronic signature company in document management. So we own about 70% of the market in this space. Gartner and Forrester have rated us #1 in this space. And we work in all areas: legal, healthcare, real estate, banking. So this topic of end-to-end security is pretty critical from our product standpoint, but I think it's critical for everybody, really, when we talk about security. So I think the first thing to really talk about is what is end-to-end security. Most people would say, well, that's my computer and that's the other person's computer. But while I've been sitting here, my jawbone up has buzzed me 3 times. And I don't know if you're familiar, you know the exercise band. So basically when you stay too still for more than 15 minutes, it will buzz me. So it buzzed me 3 times while I was up here. So I might argue this is an endpoint. Mobile phones are definitely an endpoint. Somebody might say, who's in a telecom company, well, that server is the endpoint. So really, the question is, what really is the endpoint? And I think that's a huge problem for us, because until you define that, how do you define the security? And then more importantly, how do you define who owns the security? So there is, and this is really important to have us understand, because security is a very mature, the cybercrime is a very mature business. Within cybercrime, you have not only the raw material, the data, you have these botnets, which are largely compromised computers. One of your computers may be a botnet, or maybe one of your kids' computers may be a botnet. You don't even know it. Those computers are being used to deliver malware and different code that is compromising end users' computers. There is even known mergers and acquisitions within the botnet, the malware world, where one organized crime group develops this malware that's really effective, and another organized crime group buys that company and takes over the code and develops it. So it's a very vibrant business, and not only is it a vibrant business, it's global in nature. So when you look at where this was based on a TrustWave report back in 2012, but where are these attacks originating from? Well, this is kind of a map of the last known place that you could originate from. So as you can see, the United States is a big culprit in that, as is obviously former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe. So this is not just a problem of the United States, it's really a global problem. So what are the challenges outside of the 2 that I just said? People are making a lot of money and it's a global problem. Those are big motivators. If you can make think about any industry that's made a lot of money, that's illegal. How well have we done at controlling it? Not very well. So this is no different. So it's a never-ending battle for us. In terms of the reasons why is, it's a complex ecosystem. You think about all the different parts, different companies, different products, different services that are part of delivering data to you. And I've got an example I'm going to show on the next slide just to give you some understanding of just how complex that is. There's a lot of any space where there is money to be made, a lot of new companies come in, and a lot of times they're very immature when it comes to security, because they're not being driven off of, do you have the most secure product, except in the case of DocuSign. That's probably the second question the customers ask, so we have to deal with it. But in many other cases, really innovative technologies and new companies who are introducing them don't have the burden of security that they have to deal with. People are more concerned about their revenues and their growth, and they're not asking them as much about security. So they tend to not have to deal with it as much. And until they become much more mature and people start saying, or they have a breach, different things that drive them into having to deal with this. So I want to just take a quick look at, I'll just talk about this for a second before I get into the example. So when you think about data, it's complex. Data is in movement, data is in storage, data is in creation, data is in use, data is archived and then finally data is destroyed. There are states of data, and you have to think about the security of every state of that data. At DocuSign, everything is secured in transmission, everything is encrypted in transmission, it's encrypted in storage, it's encrypted in archive. And if the customer so chooses, they can destroy it because they control their own data. So we have to think about every point of this, and whenever you think about your data, you should be also thinking about how is my data treated all the way through this process in these different states. Getting to the complexity of an ecosystem, I have an example because I spent about 4 years in banking. Dealt a lot with mobile payments and all the security related with those. So I kind of did some research. I wrote a paper on mobile banking and payments and the security challenges around those. And this was one of the bits of research I did. But if you think about, just to give you an idea of the complexity here, now the blue represents more established companies or technologies. The orange is the new stuff that's coming in, the new companies, the new technologies. Think about securing that entire ecosystem from start to finish. It's a daunting task. And then people say, well, why did my credit card get compromised? Well, it could have been one of about 50 reasons why it got compromised. It isn't just the bank. There's all these other different companies involved. So it's a very complex situation. So it might seem like, how are we ever going to secure this? And honestly, sometimes I wonder. But this is the challenge we have, and I think the opportunity of the internet also, as Mike mentioned, is kind of the challenge of the internet as well. And then finally, I just want to end with this, which is really what should you all be doing and asking. And mainly, you should be ensuring your data is understanding how it's treated throughout its life cycle. Ensure you understand the different vendors who will have access to your data. This is not a trivial point. So if you think you're sending your data to vendor XYZ, you need to ask them, well, who are you subcontracting to? Is my data going off to this country and I don't know it? Are you using vendors that I'm not aware of that are doing things with my data? That's, a company often will not tell you exactly that. They won't be, so they'll say, oh, we're using this company that's located in Kansas City. And then you ask them one more question. Well, does that data stay in Kansas City? Well, no, we have some people that data then goes over to India to get processed or whatever. So I'm not implying that India is less secure, but you do need to understand where your data is at. And then we all have an obligation on our endpoints, your laptops, your mobile phone. If you don't secure your endpoint, the stuff you control, you're not going to be secure, because no company can do that yet. They can't force you to have security on your mobile phone. They can't force you to have security on your laptop. So that is a critical part, and banks are getting pulled into that debate, basically because I've been in situations where the customer claimed because their computer was compromised that the bank was responsible for their computer being compromised. Well, I wouldn't necessarily agree, but that is the debate that's going on. So that's about all I have, and I don't know if you have any questions.
Questions for Vanessa? There's one down in front. Quick, Mike, run. And then we want the next question from the very back and the right.
This first question is kind of preliminary. I've heard of DocuSign, but I'm not exactly sure. Can you identify like a product that electronic signature related that I might understand what it means to me?
Oh, so DocuSign is we're trying to make DocuSign a verb. Like, did you DocuSign it? That's kind of the marketing. So if you go in and let's say you're doing mortgage, you're refinancing your home, instead of sitting there and signing you know, how many it seems like 100 pages of documents, it actually gets pulled up on your computer, and you sign it all on the computer, and it gets stored securely. It's a legally binding document, and you don't have the paper anymore. And it's pretty much you control where it goes and how it's managed. And
The reason I ask is, so would that be similar to signing a document electronically in Adobe?
yes, EchoSign and Salinas are two competitors of DocuSign.
And here's part of the reason I ask. I mean, just this morning, I got an email from Adobe indicating that their passwords have been breached, and they reset all the passwords. Now, I had to think for a minute about how that affects me, and I think it relates to some consumer photo editing software, not to anything related to with any real security implication. But it makes me wonder, you know, where is there not vulnerability in that space? And I don't know if you can address that, or
Yeah. So
just because of the timing of it made me wonder.
So Adobe did have a breach that was announced, I think last week. They had about 2.9 million credit cards that were taken. It's through preliminary information. Again, this is all, you know, has to be validated more, but they had it's related to their a cold fusion vulnerability, I believe. It is not, there's not much more detail beyond that, at least hard facts. The fact of the matter is anything on the internet can be compromised, anything. It's your bank, and banks have had breaches, as credit card processors have had breaches, and so we're in the world of the internet, and that is, no company is above a breach. And anybody who says they are either delusional, or, you know, they don't understand that what their company does. So that's, you know.
Okay, that's a perfect segue then to the question I kind of had for the whole panel. Last year, the president issued an executive order asking that industry work together on a collaborative framework. The National Institute of Standards and Technology was to have one by tomorrow, which is not going to happen because of the shutdown. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering about anybody's thoughts about that framework, whether you're involved, whether your industry's involved, where it's going, and also, since we've kind of established that everyone's vulnerable, where might we be in terms of federal legislation on cybersecurity? You made reference to high tech, which is very healthcare specific, and I'm just wondering if anybody has any thoughts on where we could end up in terms of more comprehensive federal legislation.
Okay, so I'll go first, and then, because I was involved with that. I've been at DocuSign about 2 months now. Prior to that, I was at a bank running their enterprise information security, and we were very involved in that effort. Here's my philosophy, though. It doesn't matter if it's a policy or a regulation. If a company doesn't really do more than try and check the box around security, they're still going to be vulnerable. Policies will not fix this. I mean, it'll force people down a road they don't want to go, but coming from a regulated industry like a bank, I realize, which has a lot of regulation, you could still figure out, the auditors are not as smart as you think they are. And it doesn't matter, they don't get paid enough to begin with. So, but in essence, you know, they are not going to figure out they're not going to uncover in most cases the areas where you might not be compliant. And people have become pretty skilled at working with auditors. So there is policy is not going to fix this problem. It'll help. I think it'll push people along, but it's not going to fix the problem. That's kind of my perspective.
And I think from the healthcare perspective, and I'm just looking at that particular industry, it's a very complex problem because we don't all work together as we should. There are a number of different parties responsible for providing and sourcing data for healthcare. And one of the challenges that we've been working through over the past 10 years or so is getting away from each vendor having their own proprietary way of collecting data, of sourcing data, of storing data into some sort of semblance of industry standard. And that's a tough nut to crack because we have been a very proprietary industry for so long. So the manufacturers of one particular medical device might store their information in this format and call it this data label, and the manufacturers of a different medical device may have something completely different. And it's a challenge not only for the industry as a whole to manage, but also until we get to the point to where we're able to exchange that data effectively. You know, a name's got to be a name, it's got to be a name, it's got to be a name across the entire spectrum.
So in my previous life, previous role, I was pretty heavily involved in the process, working with NIST and a number of the agencies, trying to put some information together around that and kind of influence the direction that executive order is going to take. I think, and Vanessa kind of hit on this, I think the challenge that they're running into from a policy perspective is, how do you legislate some of this stuff? How do you put some of these things into a policy when at the end of the day, regardless of what you say, whether you're going to do A, B, and C, depending on the threat and the risk that you're dealing with, you may not have to do A, B, and C. And in some cases, policies, regulations, things like that actually detract you and take you away from doing what you should be doing based on the threats that you are facing. Okay, so should I patch my machines? Yes, I should patch my machines. That's fantastic. Should there be a regulatory requirement to do that and I'd be held accountable to it? I don't know. Because maybe instead of patching my machines, I need to be focusing on and firming up my VPN environment because I got someone actively knocking at the door trying to get in my VPN space, and I need to shift my resources and go over there, right? Many times, all of us are resource constrained. Many times, I knew an attacker was coming in a certain area, and because of regulatory requirements or because an auditor was coming in, I had to shift those resources away from where I knew I was vulnerable and where I knew I was going to get attacked to cover something artificially made up because someone said that's a great best practice and we should do it. So I think finding that balance around, yes, there are things that we should be doing, but we need to have the flexibility to say, or rather have a program that is able to give me information about the threats that I am dealing with and then be able to react to that, I think is critical. What I was kind of advocating in that process was not just giving someone a checklist of, patch management, vulnerability management, all these different things, but encourage people and try to get them to stand up programs where they can implement the intelligent analysis, adaptive defense pieces I was talking about. Set up environments where people can share threat intelligence. Within the defense community, they're sharing a lot of information on a real-time basis. We have people in portals 24 hours a day sharing information about what's going on so that we can help defend each other and we can know what's happening. If someone's not hitting me right now, chances are I knew where they were because the other people they were hitting were telling me about it and telling me how they were hitting them. And I could look at that and go, ooh, that's new. I gotta do something else. So I think from a policy perspective, finding that balance is the real trick in how do you manage that. And I'm interested to see how they attempt to do that.
I know there was at least one question in the middle of the room that we didn't get to earlier, if you still have it.
I don't, but I have a different question, so good enough. It sounds like there's some skepticism of the policy approach. But I'm very curious. I mean, it sounds, at least in part, it's sort of the arms race problem. This is a fast-moving sphere. You create a policy, it's obsolete 6 months before it's implemented, and then you basically just have cost of compliance rather than anything protective. So I'm curious, though, we see the same basic problem across pretty much anything touching the internet. Copyright policy comes to mind in particular, where it's just always steps behind the technology. What can policymakers do, from your perspective, that's actually productive, that's not just sticking you with compliance costs, but maybe setting general benchmarking rather than specific requirements? Is there a regulatory approach that's productive?
So in my experience, I think the best thing that they could do is provide forums for best practice sharing, information and intelligence sharing that's out there. The challenge with intelligence, I'm not talking about junk intelligence like an MD5 hash or a bad IP address. That's easy to change. That's not long-term actionable intelligence. I'm talking about base things on how these people operate and how they work, ways to track the tools that they use to make these things, stuff like that. Things that are hard for the attacker to change. Providing information, forums where you can exchange that. Things that are going to make the attackers basically rewrite their attack from scratch and try an entirely new approach. Those are the types of things that if we can get that information out, help people understand what's the biggest bang for the buck that I can do that's going to impact my company the least, but impact the attacker the most. Sharing that type of stuff. Again, keep going back to it, but within the defense space, there's actually sessions, tech exchanges, where everyone sits and just talks about this is what we've done, this is the coolness, this is what worked, this didn't, this was really cheap to do and it had a big impact. That type of information I think is good. Beyond that, I think it's also from a international diplomacy perspective, something needs to be done in that area. Right now there's zero implications, there's zero downside to doing some of this stuff from a state sponsor perspective. You're trying to build an industry, let's just go get the information from the existing industry, and now we got a leg up and we're able to start running. That, I think, is where some of the diplomacy needs to happen, and we need to think of creative, inventive ways to be able to address that, because right now, you mentioned the arms race analogy. It is an arms race. Tit for tat, I do this, you do that. And that's because we're fighting an asymmetric battle right now. The U.S. really has everything to lose in this space. One, we're the most vulnerable from a cyber perspective because we rely on it so much. One of the reasons that our military is so strong, one of the reasons our industry is so strong is because we use technology to our advantage, doing more with less from an industry perspective. How long have we heard that? And generally that comes down to technology. It allows us to do that. Someone's figured out a way to take our greatest strength and use it against us. We got to figure out how to turn that table. And I think there's some diplomatic pieces that come into that puzzle and figure out how to make that happen. That's my thought.
And I think just following up on that Brian alluded to this earlier, is that to some degree security is more of a reactive process than it is a proactive process. And how do we get to the point to where we're one step ahead of the folks? I think that we will never be able to completely squash it, that there's always going to be somebody out there that wonders, what if I do this, what if I try that? Regardless of their motivation, there are folks out there that just hack just to see if they can hack. And there'll always be creative ways, but our challenge is to move from that reactive cycle to a more proactive cycle.
I think pretty much anything where there are positive incentives for a company, whether revenue or other, they tend to move in that direction. So I think instead of taking the stick approach, I think they need to, legislators need to think about the carrot approach. And maybe there is some positive incentives that they could start coming up with for those companies who are showing, having a very good program in place or having good product security in place. So I think if you continue to force people in a direction they don't feel is critical, now that might be short-sighted because they probably should feel it's critical, but if you continue to force people, they're going to always try and get by on the bare minimum. I think that's kind of human nature. I definitely see that in my teenagers. So I think, I just, we have to be incented in the right direction, and it's for a company, I think there's got to be some kind of financial incentive. And I think there are forward-looking companies. I mean, not to plug DocuSign, but DocuSign basically said, we need some mature leaders in security, so we're going to go recruit those people because security is super important. I know our competitors have not necessarily done the same thing. So, there's just, some companies are going to be forward-looking and some are going to not pay as much attention to it. And so I think some positive incentives need to be put in place. Otherwise, people are just going to get by with the bare minimum.
Do you have a web question, Mike?
Speaking of financial, question from Twitter, what are the cybersecurity implications of digital anonymous currencies like Bitcoin? That could be our next panel, huh?
Yeah, Bitcoin is, just before I left the bank I was at, we actually did some research on Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is, there's both, I think, potentially kind of industry changing aspects of Bitcoin in the virtual currency. I mean, I don't know how many of you have kids who play different video games and they have virtual money, virtual whatever in those games all the time. So I don't think it is going to go away. I think it represents a threat to traditional currency. I think that the organized crime and other elements that are leveraging it. I don't know if, I don't really know the outcome of where that's going. I think it's still too early I think some countries are trying to shut it down. I think there's, but I'm not sure how they're going to get a handle on it 100%. So I do think it's kind of early still, but it's something definitely to watch. And I know the banks are watching it. So.
That is a really new topic, and I think we don't know the impacts, as Vanessa said. Come back to this sort of panel in 5 years, and virtual currency may be the only thing that we talk about because that's where everybody's currencies are at, but we don't know yet what those impacts are. And don't trivialize the idea that, that's something that is in online gaming scenarios and environments. Just last week, Grand Theft Auto 5, I think, is the version that was released, and the #1 entertainment revenue stream for the first week of activities went to that game. That game made more money than any movies released in the last 10 years. There are more people involved with online gaming than there are in most industries. So virtual currencies may be a game changer in terms of security and threats.
I was just going to say, in the healthcare space, we get reimbursed so poorly, we'll take virtual currency as well.
We are right out of time. Let me ask our panelists, any final closing comments or points you'd like to make? All right, no one's struggling over the microphone, so let me thank the audience first for your participation and questions. Thank you for the Twitter question, and let me thank all three of our panelists and ask you to give them a nice round of applause.